Hello, class. We've now reached chapter 9 of the book of Zechariah, and the title of this recording is Historical and Eschatological Preparation for the Coming of the True King. Let's look at verse number 1. We see the Lord's oracle against Hadrach. The burden of the word of the Lord is against the land of Hadrach, with Damascus as its resting place, for the eyes of men, especially of all the tribes of Israel, are toward the Lord. For the first time in Zechariah, the prophet directs a message to or about or against pagan nations, with the possible exception of chapter 5, verses 5 through 11. That would be night vision 7. But the prophet does so to provide a backdrop to the coming of the Messianic king who will take his royal throne as a result of conquest. The word of the Lord concerns Hadrach because Hadrach is the first place in the line of the march. It is most likely that Hadrach was a province located to the south of Aleppo, reaching perhaps as far as Damascus. If so, Zechariah may be saying that Damascus was the resting place or capital of the Hadrach region. And here we see also the divine warrior. So I repeated on this slide, verse number 1. The beginning of an itinerary can be perceived here, a march toward moving from north to south, ending at last at Jerusalem, and we see that in verse number 8. The march has no sooner begun when it commands the attention of all the surrounding peoples, including Israel. This at least appears to be the meaning for the eyes of men, especially of all the tribes of Israel. What is clear is that the Lord has come to save his people Israel, and that's clear from verse number 8 in this chapter. What is in view is that the triumphant procession of the Lord has captured the attention of the whole world. And then we proceed to verses 2 through 4, and the title of this slide is Divine Punishment. So let's read 2 through 4. And Hamath also, which borders on it, Tyre and Sidon, though they are very wise, for Tyre built herself a fortress and piled up silver like dust and gold like the mire of the streets. Behold, the Lord will dispossess her and cast her wealth into the sea, and she will be consumed with fire. Particularly concerned about the Lord's activities, in addition to Israel, are Hamath, bordering on Damascus, and Tyre and Sidon. If Damascus is coming in for God's wrath, can these other places be far behind? Hamath was a territory to the west and north of Damascus, occasionally cited as on the northern border of Israel, roughly the territory of modern-day Lebanon. Tyre and Sidon lay west and northwest of Damascus on the Mediterranean coast. Zechariah notes that Tyre had built up fortifications behind which she amassed and hoarded her great revenues of silver and gold. Zechariah reveals that the Lord will cause Tyre to lose her wealth, cast her fortifications into the sea, and burn whatever is left. Divine punishment. And then we see verse 5 and 6, and the title of this slide is Proud Philistia Will Be Shamed. So let's read 5 and 6. Askelon will see it and be afraid. Gaza too will writhe in great pain. Also Ekron, for her expectation has been confounded. Moreover, the king will perish from Gaza, and from Askelon will not be inhabited. And a mongrel race will dwell in Ashdod, and I will cut off the pride of the Philistines. The list of those places filled with fear at the Lord's coming continues with Askelon, Gaza, Ekron, and all Philistine city-states. When Askelon sees what has happened to her northern neighbors, she will be afraid. Gaza even more so, and Ekron most of all. Gaza will lose its king, and Askelon its entire population. A fourth city, Ashdod, will be occupied by a mongrel people. When all is done, proud Philistia will be shamed and embarrassed. Zechariah 7. This slide is titled, "The Lord will terminate the degrading and offensive practices of the pagan world." So let's read 7. "And I will remove their blood from their mouth and their detestable things from between their teeth. Then they also will be a remnant for our God, and be like a clan in Judah, and Ekron like a Jebusite." In summation, Zechariah declares that the blood of the Philistines will be removed from their mouth and their detestable things from their teeth. Thoroughly chastened and purified, Philistia will become a remnant for God, like a clan in Judah. Ekron, one of her city-states, will be like the Jebusites, who by Zechariah's time had been totally assimilated into Judah. The blood and detestable things refer to the religious perversions of the Philistines. This no doubt included the slaughter of animals. There were considered by Israelites as being unclean, and the eating of animal flesh that had not been properly drained of its blood. The detestable things, however, suggests acts and objects associated with paganism. Removal of these things, as well as suggesting the conversion of the Philistines, should be taken in the sense of bringing these evils to an end. We see verse 8. The Lord completes his campaign toward Jerusalem. Verse 8 reads, "But I will camp around my house because of an army, because of him who passes by and returns. And no oppressor will pass over them any more, for now I have seen with my eyes." When the itinerary is complete, the Lord says that he will have arrived at his house, that is the temple, and will surround it with his own presence, so that no hostile force can ever again oppress his people. The march that commenced in the north will overwhelm successively Hadrach, Damascus, Hamath, Tyre, and Sidon, and 4 of the Philistine cities. It will end at Jerusalem with the Lord triumphant in his procession, standing guard over his house and his people. In the tradition of holy war, he has come against the foe, defeated him in battle, and established himself as ruler in his royal palace. This may be the last slide. Let me check. No, one more. Here's the historical reality behind verses 1 through 8 in chapter 9. Scholars have been hopelessly divided on this matter. Why is that over there like that? These events have been dated anywhere from the time of Tiglath-Pileser III of Assyria to the time of the Maccabees in the 2nd century BC. Eugene Merrill, however, writes that what has traditionally been overlooked which is eschatological literature, though grounded in the present time, the prophet views the future in very stylized and conventional patterns. The point here is that the Lord, like many conquerors before him in human history, will manifest himself in the last days as a vanquished hero. What is at hand is a formulaic way of asserting an unquestionably literal establishment of the Lord's kingship in the end times, a suzerainty to be achieved in the pattern well known to Zechariah and his fellow countrymen. Baldwin adds that Zechariah is using past events to typify a supremely important future event, Just as successive alien armies swept through Syria and Palestine and claimed a right to each territory, so finally the Lord will see every proud city capitulate to him. And I believe that is the end. No, one more. We have the prophecy of the triumphant entry of the Messiah in verse 9. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion, shout in triumph, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you. He is just and endowed with salvation, humble and mounted on a donkey, even on a coat the foal of a donkey. In verse 9, the coming king is described as humble. This hardly expresses of a conquering is expressive of a conquering hero riding at the head of a victorious army, but speaks of peace. The speaker of Zechariah 9, verses 9 and 10 here in this chapter must be the Lord. Therefore, the king in view is not the Lord, but a separate individual. Within the immediate context, the humbleness of the king is set in juxtaposition to his victorious arrival in verse 9, and the destruction of the Lord's enemy in verse 10. This is to magnify the fact that whatever success the king achieves must be attributed to the enabling power of the Lord. In the New Testament, both Matthew and John clearly understand Jesus to be the triumphant king, but neither quotes more than Zechariah 9:9. They don't go to verse 10. Zechariah, however, was addressing this strictly eschatological aspect of the king's coming. He sees a day when the Lord will deliver his covenant people from the enemy nations as well in verse number 10. And I believe maybe this is the end. Nope, I should have looked. Here's number 10. I should have guessed. Universal peace under the Messiah's rule. The Lord said, I will cut off the chariot from Ephraim, and the horse from Jerusalem, and the bow of war will be cut off, and he will speak peace to the nations, and his dominion will be from sea to sea, and from the river to the ends of the earth. A universal rule to the ends of the earth. Look at verse 8, backtrack, has already made it clear that it is the enemy without that requires the Lord to encamp around his temple. In verse 10 here, and we see, it is suggested that once the instruments of war will be cut off, there will be peace among the nations. Isaiah 2:4 says, as well to support verse 10, and Isaiah supports it, he says, and he will judge between the nations and will render decisions for many peoples, and they will hammer their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not lift up sword against nation, and never again will they learn war. So, universal peace under the Messiah's rule. Zechariah is not the only one that predicted it. Isaiah and others did too. This peace will issue from the universal rule of the king, for the Lord refers to the king's dominion as being from sea to sea and from the river to the ends of the earth. That concludes